Hi there. Welcome to the Sensational Synergy podcast and YouTube station. I am Laura Lee Smith, and I am here to lead the way for you to have sensational synergy so you are self-regulated and effectively co-regulating with others so we can lead our youth to really understanding their nervous system needs based off of their sensory inputs. So join me as we put mental health at the center of our conversation and connection, focusing on how we can meet our nervous system needs so we can be more regulated and ready to learn and to get to our cortex. Why, hello. Welcome to the first episode of Being a Sensational Synergy podcast, YouTube channel, and blog post. This is such a beautiful way for me to be able to provide multiple opportunities of engagement because it's so important for us to have access to our learning and our inspiration in the way that we feel best comfortable. And so, mind you, I'm not challenging you to not get comfortable. I think it's important for you also to explore different ways of gaining your learning. But I know that our brains are also designed and wired strongest in certain ways. And so I hope you choose the arena that is most comfortable for you. So here we are today, and I'm going to be starting our first episode of a series that's titled, It's Not Entitlement, It's Effective Accommodation. And this series is really focusing on how we can get to know our sensory system and our nervous system's functions so we can effectively respond to behavior, so we can support the nervous system needs with effective accommodation. And you're going to experience language shifts. You're going to experience behavior interpretation shifts. You're going to be able to grow and be able to get to know the humans in your life better. And not only the humans, this is specifically designed on how we can lead our youth or our next generation to be more resilient and more reflective and less reactive. So with this, we have some outcomes, and I want to share with you that these are all shared with you in my blog post as well. They're not going to be scripted, perfectly matched. As of course, I've written my blog post, I am now articulating what's within that blog post. And I also will be sharing this audio version of wealth as well through my podcast. And so I encourage you to visit my blog so you can get the resources that are also aligned with this podcast and YouTube video. So there's great resources within there that will be referred to as we go through this podcast or presentation for you to be able to apply what you learn and grow from in this experience. So let's go back to those outcomes. The outcomes of after listening to this series, not just this episode, but this series, you're going to be able to discover effective accommodations for nervous system needs. You're going to be able to learn how to support self-regulation, behavior response, and respond to mental health for our youth and ourselves, like I've already said. So I think that there's going to be less conflict, and you're going to be able to effectively respond to challenging behavior. So you're going to have more positive interactions with your kiddos and each other. So again, mental health is at the center of this, but understanding that we are responding to nervous system needs. So if you are a teacher, an educational leader, or if you are a parent of a neurodiverse child, or of a neurotypical child, this is your place to be because you are wanting to do the best you can, lead the youth in your lives. And so again, these mind shifts are going to make momentum and remarkable change. So I want to come into this with a couple common understandings. And so this is for the series, including, of course, this episode. This episode is going to cover the basics that you're going to apply throughout this series, as well as getting specific on one of the sensory systems that we're going to explore. So now, if you're a teacher, if you're an educational leader, or a parent of, again, a neurodiverse child or a neurotypical child, you may have experienced or are experiencing the challenging behaviors that are hard to overcome. I want to acknowledge the fact that it may seem very complex to meet these needs. And because you've gone through all of your tools in your toolbox and applied them the best you can, and it's still not working. So I'm inviting you to this experience to maybe discover a tool that you didn't know existed to put into the toolbox for you to explore. All right. With that, it's not as challenging as we have endured to really work through the challenging behaviors that sometimes our nervous systems communicate through behavior. So these are effective accommodations because they are with purpose and they are with promise. And so I absolutely encourage you to challenge yourself a little bit to think outside the box. And when you're thinking outside the box, I'm not really necessarily asking you to jump outside the box, but this is just a little bit of mind shifting because you are looking at something you maybe have already seen or an accommodation that you already know, but maybe you're like, I don't really want to do that because it may be creating an entitlement. And I don't want this kid to feel like he can have something and this kid cannot. And if you've heard yourself say that before, because I definitely have said it, not heard it. I've heard it, yes, but I've said it as well, is now going, maybe that's supporting a nervous system need. And I'm going to make sure that I have boundaries around that so it can be effective. And again, an effective accommodation. So next, mental health is at the center of so many more of our conversations now, more than they were a year and a half ago. And to me, I celebrate that because I celebrate and I welcome you to celebrate that with me because we no longer really truly have to hide from the mental health challenges that are within us and around us. And for that reason, I really truly believe that it creates unity. And we want to try to continue to unify by developing a shared understanding and developing our language of practice and interaction so that we can continue to effectively grow ourselves and our relationships to be all that it can be, okay? All that we can be and all that our relationships can be. So with that, that is why I'm asking for us to have no fluff. I want us to not be band-aiding our behavior things anymore. I think we really need to explore our systems and really go, is this system in service to meeting a nervous system need, or is it to have some power and control over the situation? So it's really important for us to start exploring a little bit of undoing, okay? Because if we get to the roots and if we begin to understand that our sensory system, our sensory and nervous systems, we can be able to look at behavior differently, and that will have a profound impact on our behavior, our interactions, and our relationships. Because guess what? Here is a baseline understanding we all should share. We all have a nervous system. Therefore, we all have nervous system needs. Now, these needs vary because of time of day, prior experience, if your basic needs have been met, trusting relationships. Those are the dynamics that contribute to the roots. And we need to explore how we can better wrap around the roots so that we can be able to have effective relationships, effective nervous system management, self-regulation, and just overall, just be able to be functioning human beings. So with this, I want to welcome you And I welcome you into this journey, and I want to explain to you what brought me here to this journey with you and my why, and why I welcome you into this world of seeking to understand. I want you to figuratively kind of start to see life with putting a sensory lens on, okay? We are going to, or I have put my sensory lens on through this last week, and I realized how much I navigate my life through my sensory input. And by understanding my sensory inputs, it's been able to create a better nervous system response. I can acknowledge when my nervous system is not regulated. I can say, oh, that sound that was white noise once before is actually creating a little bit of like angst in me. And maybe I need to step into another room where it's quiet. I have been able to recognize and navigate also how to create the world for my daughter as well. So my daughter has sensory processing dysfunction, and what that means, or disorder, as some may say, and what that means is at times she is overwhelmed by her sensory input. She's getting too much, and other times she's underwhelmed, and she's not getting enough for her nervous system to feel like it's active enough. And so she is seeking to have sensory input to have nervous system balance. And so because of that, I have to explore the environment around me in a very different way. And that has taught me so much. And those little nuances and those little accommodations that I provide for her when she is either underwhelmed or overwhelmed could seem like they're entitlement. And I've had people interpret them as being entitlement. And so I have had to clearly explain that these are not entitlement moves, I guess you could say. They are effective accommodations. Because without these effective accommodations, there is a nervous system imbalance. And when there is a nervous system imbalance, the behavior becomes the problem. And that is where we need to explore further. It's not the behavior that's the problem. The behavior is communicating something. And we have to investigate what's creating that behavior. And if we understand that the nervous system is the one that's it's creating the behavior because it's releasing all the chemicals to make it happen. And guess who talks to the nervous system? Our sensory systems and our sensory organs. So what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we feel, all talk to our nervous system that creates our behavior response. And understanding that loop is going to provide you the gold of being able to self-regulate, co-regulate, and support the behaviors of the human beings, and especially our youth in their growing minds, into having regulation and readiness to learn. Or as I like to say, get to the cortex, because our cortex is where all the information is stored, but we got to get through some gatekeepers first. So there is just this unique clarity. And let me explain to you how to get to that clarity. So I'm going to just do some basics here on how the sensory system and the nervous system communicate. And mind you, I love to talk with my hands, as you can see if you're watching my YouTube video. This is just how I've always taught. This is always how I communicate. So thank you for allowing me to have a little bit of nonverbal expression to create our understanding of this very important topic. So let's go to nervous system needs the difference between our nervous system and our sensory system and how they communicate with each other. So our sensory system got receptors, and these receptors, again, are our sensory organs, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our ears, and our skin. Those receptors send signals into our nervous system. So our sensory organs create our sensory system that are always sending signals to our brain, right? So sensory system through the receptors. There's also a secondary receptor, and that's our nerve endings. And I think there's different areas in our bodies that have different nerve endings that also communicate with our brain and nervous system. For example, imagine when you bump your elbow, that sends right to your body to activate, right? It's talking to your nervous system. That's what's happening right there. So we got this sending the message straight over to the nervous system and saying, there is a smell of pleasure, or there's a smell that reminds you of your aunt. And so you go, oh, you activate that memory and go, oh, I remember my Aunt Susie, and that smells like my mom. And that's where there's association sometimes, it activates areas of our brain, some sensory response systems in that. So with that, our nervous system then gets this signal from our sensory organs or sensory systems, and therefore then our autonomic nervous system or our nervous system sends the signal to the parts of our bodies using chemicals to say, activate, activate, danger, danger, pleasure, pleasure, activate. So that the chemicals are released from our nervous system, which again, our nervous system is made of our brain and our spinal cord. And that is where then our brain and our spinal cord release those little chemicals in our body to create behavior. And that, my friends, is the output of communication that you and I see and interpret when we see nonverbal and verbal behaviors. So to me, that's just a circle. And if we only fixate on seeking to understand the behavior, which, yes, the behavior gives us certain clues to lead us to the appropriate accommodation and intervention. But we also have to explore what sensory input originated to create that full circle. And that's why if we miss the whole sensory processing or understanding our sensory systems, or we don't consider that in our intervention and accommodations, we've missed the foundation. And how can you miss the foundation when you're building a system of response? And so therefore, that is why it's super important for us to take this journey and seek to understand our sensory systems, how they're activated, what they look like and sound like, so we can be able to design effective accommodations through a system and a structure of support for our learners, our leaders, and selves to be able to navigate the world around us effectively, or shall I say, regulated. Okay, so that's the whole purpose and a little bit of the clarity of connection between the what's and the whys and the outcomes and the nervous system and sensory system relationship. Now, before we go into our first system, I do want to acknowledge a very important fact here, that getting away from the idea of entitlement is how you manage the accommodation, right? Especially as we are developing an inclusive learning environment. We need to go back to and acknowledge the fact that we have a very diverse group of neuro needs. Nervous system needs, nervous system needs vary. Remember, they vary throughout the day, they vary each day, circumstance, all those kind of things. And so there's not a one size fits all on this one. And guess what? One person doesn't really fit it all either, because you vary throughout your day. You as a human, yeah, I'm talking to you. You actually have nervous system variation through the day. Imagine the growing minds of our kids. It could be momentary variation. And so recognizing that in itself will allow you to now see the accommodations and interventions of support that you provide for your students and selves are going to be effective when you keep sensory system, nervous system needs at the center of the why. And going back to that, classroom management and interaction is important. And I'm going to use the word critical, because if you do not have these foundational classroom practices, it's not going to be effective. You could have the best nervous system navigation system, and if you don't have these in your box, or as your center point, it's not going to be effective. So it's really important. Mind you, before I go into these, I do have a printout for you at my website. You can find that and be able to have that, so you don't have to recreate it. It's already done for you. Okay. So with that, here's my 3 things. I have it on my little notes here so I don't forget. Sensory system supports or tools are not a toy. It is not a toy. It may look like a toy, and if you're in free play, you're using it as a toy. But when you're using it as a sensory regulation tool, it is incredibly important that you emphasize this is a tool to get you regulated. And once you feel like your nervous system is regulated, that tool is returned. It is not taken to play with, because the moment you teach your brain that you're playing with it, your brain is not going to be using it as a tool for regulation. So this is a tool, not a toy. Basic. Boom. That can apply at all ages and all tools that you use in your system of support. Okay. Now, second one, if this tool is not helping you with your regulation, you need to choose a different tool and or integrate it. For example, if the noise canceling headphones still is making you wacky, choose a tactile toy to go with it. Put the noise canceling headphones on to stop this sensory input, and then have a Play-Doh in your hand or whatever to help with more input with your feeling on your skin. It's your world to experiment and explore. But again, effective use of sensory regulation tools means how you're using it, and using self-awareness and self-reflection, okay? Now, the third parameter or expectation that we need to make sure that we set for our students or children that we are providing the sensory tool for is that this tool is not, or time, is not meant to be a distraction from their learning. It cannot become a habit of being like, oh, I'm going to do the hard math, so I need to step away and do a sensory break. And if that pattern of behavior arises, that's where the curiosity of wondering why the student needs to have a distraction from their learning. But that's, again, where we have a common language of saying, again, this sensory system or the sensory tool that we are using to help get us regulated is an effort for us to be able to get to our cortex. And if you feel that you keep bumping into barriers along the way, and you're having a really tough time getting to your cortex because you're not feeling regulated and you need some support with that, that is the purpose behind the sensory tool or the sensory time. Because the moment that changes and it becomes a different purpose is when the tool loses its power to support the learner or child to be able to be successful. So nonetheless, those three parameters are just basic managements. So we make sure that what we are providing as a accommodation or as a support tool is not used for an entitlement opportunity. Okay, see where the clarification comes in there? So furthermore, I feel like that wraps up a whole bunch of good basics of understanding of really what our sensory system and nervous system relationship is into the communication of our behavior response, as well as focusing on maintaining regulation or being regulated and ready to learn and be our best selves through our sensory regulation. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode, and I'm going to invite you to do a few things and choose between these few things. Don't do them all, my friends. I suggest you to, one, go to my website and check out all of the resources that are available for there. You'll see the link, of course, in this YouTube or on my podcast, in the intro as well. All that information, that is a center point of information for you. If you're wanting to be specific, in my blog, you are going to find these resources specifically for you that are aligned with this. And so I have a resource to say what those 3 must-haves for classroom management. I have a poster to help you out explain what the autonomic nervous system is and what that looks like, so you can dive a little deeper on there. I am working on designing a course for you, a mini course, so you can go a little further with these accommodations based off of sensory needs. Look for that. Just stay involved. And so if you absorbed this opportunity through YouTube or through my podcast, I again invite you to go to my blog post so you can have some resources, or if you want to have a little bit more further explanation of what I just shared with you during this time. So The next episode is going to be focusing on the auditory system and how we can get to know the auditory system, sensory system, so we can be serving our sensory needs based on of that input. It'll be shorter and sweet, but it'll be so important for you to engage in. So join me for the next episode. Thank you for joining me for the first, and have a sensationally synergetic day today. All right, we will talk soon. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thanks for joining me today.